Oh, good Lord, it's 90 degrees outside, and this isn't even March done, which means we're going to have a bitch of a summer coming up here in a few weeks. We only had maybe a couple of days of snow this winter, didn't have much of a winter, so this is going to be a pain in the ass. It's going to be like a few years ago when we had 73 days of 100 degrees or more. I hate Texas this time of year. Oh, hey, sorry everybody in the VC, it's Matt here, and I thought I would check in and do another review, continuing in my series of reviewing Beach Boys albums in the order they were released. And so, without further ado, we'll get right to the album. And this album, how that happened? We're up to So Tough, Carl and the Passion So Tough by the Beach Boys. There's the front of the jacket. There's the back of the album. And this one came out May 15th of 1972. This is a later, got this not too long ago, so it's a repress. The original pressings in the United States, but not in Europe, came with a bonus disc, which was a copy of the album Pet Sounds from 1966. This is sort of seen as a little bit of a change of pace for the band, kind of going in a different direction with this album. Good album, nowhere near as good as Pet Sounds, but pretty good album overall. We'll get into that. The title is inspired by Brian and Mike Love's high school band, which they were trying to get Carl into the band. He must have been all of 8 years old or something at the time, because when Beach Boys did their first album, I think he was only like 14 or 15. But so they were trying to get him in the band, and they said, we'll call it Carl and the Passions if you join the band, which they, of course, didn't end up doing, but he ended up joining the band all the same, and that's a good thing. So there's that. The I don't know if you can see, it says the Beach Boys across the top there. I think the original editions have Beach Boys painted in white on the door of this pickup or car or whatever this is here, or at least I've seen pictures of them doing that. So this last album, Surf's Up, did pretty well compared to recent Beach Boys albums of the last 5 or 6 years. It got up to number 29 in the United States. This one didn't do as well, but it did better than some of the ones earlier. This got up to 50 in the United States and 25 in England. So, like I said, some changes going on in the band. Bruce Johnson left the band before this came out. Of course, he would come back later on, but he left the band. His only involvement is he's got backing vocals on the song Marcella. Otherwise, he's absent from this album. Why he left, he got in a fight with the manager, Jack Riley. Kind of, depending on who you ask, you get a different story, whether he was fired or whether he decided to quit. But he left for a while, and he came back later. The other big changes are 2 new members were added to the band. Carl was the main producer of this album, and he brought in a guy named Blondie Chapin and a guy named Ricky Fatar, not sure how you pronounce that. Both of them are from South Africa, and they had both been in a band called The Flames, not the James Brown band, but a South African band. And so he brought him in, wanted an extra guitarist, and also Ricky plays drums. Dennis Wilson had injured his hand and was not able to play drums for a year or so. So even though he's on this album, I don't know that he plays drums on any of it. Maybe some of the early sessions. I'm not sure when he had the injury, but anyway, Ricky does most of the drumming. And both of these guys write a couple of songs for the album and sing a couple of songs. So Blondie would play with the Beach Boys up through the next album, Holland, and then he would go on and play some session work with a lot of people. He worked with the band. He would later join the Rolling Stones as a touring member, and I believe he's still with them. And I think he even played some backup instrumentation on some of those later albums, like Big Bang Theory or Bridges to Babylon. I'm not positive on that. And the last Brian Wilson solo album that came out last year, No Peer Pressure, he plays on that, so he's still bouncing around. Ricky, Beatle fans might know, is one of the Ruddles. He was in the Reynolds TV show All You Need Is Cash. I guess he probably played on the album too, the soundtrack album, I'm not sure. And he went on to play with bands like Split Enz and Crowded House, and he's been with Bonnie Raitt for last few years. He also did a lot of, has done a lot of soundtrack music for films and TV shows, so he's still bouncing around. And yeah, so there's that. This is another one that I was not, I mean, I'd heard of this album, but I didn't know anything of it. I'd heard of the song Marcella, but I don't think I'd heard it before listening to this. And this is one, this is kind of the period of the band. Of course, the 60s period, but a lot of people really like that period, that post-Pet Sounds up through Holland period. And this is the penultimate album before Holland that's highly rated by a lot of people, especially people in England or true Beach Boys fans. Of course, that run of albums is generally unknown and ignored by most people in America. They weren't really having hits per se anymore or being paid much attention to, which is, again, I've said this over and over, it's a shame because the last 5 or 6 albums I've reviewed, while they don't, maybe not quite as good as their golden age of the 60s, early 60s up through 67 or so, they're really good and even great in a lot of cases, and so it's a shame that they didn't get more airplay and notice, and not so well known today, unfortunately. Some good stuff, but I didn't really know anything on this, so I didn't know what to expect going in. It's another album that sounds, well, basically for the most part, it's a early 70s hard rock sounding album. Doesn't sound a lot like the Beach Boys throughout most of the album. It does in some places, but mostly not. Sounds certainly doesn't sound like the 60s Beach Boys for the most part. But let's get through the limited involvement with Brian. Unfortunately, he writes, I think, has writing credits on 3 songs, 2 or 3 songs, and he plays some on it and does some singing, but he's largely absent, unfortunately, because he's sinking deeper at this time into drugs and depression and mental problems and so forth. But he's still around, so let's just go through the songs, I guess. Side 1, first song is called You Need a Mess of Help to Stand Alone. A mouthful of a title there. This was written by Brian and the manager Jack Riley. Carl sings lead. This was released as a single in the Netherlands and got to number 29. I don't think it was released as a single over here. Pretty good, solid song. It's just a funky country rock sounding early 70s song. Got a little bit of a Beach Boys vocal breakdown, sort of midpoint, but otherwise it's a very early 70s sounding thing, sort of a country rock, honky-tonk, funky piano. Sounds a lot like, could have been a Ringo song, and it would have been a great song for Ringo to, if they would have been of a mind to give it to Ringo, but it sounds sort of like a Ringo song circa the Ringo album or something. That 73, 74 period Ringo. Pretty good song. I'm going to give that a 7. Second song is called Here She Comes. This is by Fatar, and I know I'm probably saying that wrong, and Chaplin. Blondie and Ricky there. They wrote it. I'm not sure which one sings it. I think Blondie does. I can't, every time I hear that name I think of Debbie Harry and Blondie, but it has nothing to do with that. But play this for someone that doesn't know the Beach Boys, that's not a Beach Boys expert, and they'd never guess it was the Beach Boys. Sounds nothing like them. It's a very early mid-70s FM radio sounding song. It's just about as far away from the Beach Boys sound as you can get. It's I don't know, it sounds sort of like a Al Stewart, Jerry Rafferty type song to me, something like that maybe. It's a solid song, maybe not terribly memorable. It sounds like it'd be a good song back when you were, high school days, kind of cruising around in the car listening to type song. It's doesn't sound anything like the Beach Boys, but it's pretty good. I'm going to give that a 7. So we get to the third song on side 1. It's called He Come Down, not Comes Down, He Come Down. So Al Jardine, Brian, and Mike wrote this. Nice piano. It's a very sort of religious, spiritual vibe song that kind of confused message in a way. I mean, you're talking about Jesus, and they're talking about transcendental meditation, and the Maharishi, and Krishna, and I think they got some Buddha in there, and so it's a little bit hippy dippy, but I guess their heart's in the right place. Kind of a bit of a Beach Boys sounding song, kind of a bit of a black gospel sounding song, especially the coda at the end of the song that comes in that sounds like something straight out of a you know gospel choir in a black church. Pretty cool song. I'm going to give it an 8, and it hits me that there's a lot of religious and spiritual overtones in the Beach Boys songs, going back as far as, I guess, Warmth of the Sun, really, if you want to look at it that way, but certainly from Pet Sounds to Smile On. So I'm not saying yay or nay on that, just something that I noticed, that there's quite a bit of that, and never really heard them talk about religion one way or the other. I know that Mike Love went off to see the Maharishi and still meditates to this day, supposedly. I think Brian maybe does too, I'm not sure. But anyways, it's kind of an interesting something I noticed there. Number 4 is Marcella, which was released as a single in the US, and it was a huge hit. It rocketed all the way up to number 110 on the charts. It's written by Brian and Jack Riley and someone named Tandon Almer. Don't know who that is. Brian says that he wrote this with wanted it to be Rolling Stones sounding, or with the Rolling Stones in mind. It doesn't really sound like a Rolling Stones song to me at all, but it's about a massage therapist. He was going to get massages at this place, and apparently he had developed a crush on the girl that was giving him his massages, and so the music goes back actually on this. That was a song on Sunflower that they started to write and abandoned that uses this music, and all the way back to 1963 and a song called All Dressed Up for School. Both of those songs later got released on one of the Beach Boy compilation CD box sets. But so this one rocks along. Sounds very, like I said, it doesn't sound like the Rolling Stones to me. In parts, it sounds like George Harrison around the time of the Extra Texture, or 33 1/3 era George Harrison, in bits and pieces, not all the way through. Nice lyrics. One arm over my shoulders, sandals dance at my feet. Some kind of nice imagery, I think. Good solid song. I'm going to give it an 8. Probably should have done a little bit better than 110 on the charts. That closes out side 1, which brings us to side 2, which starts off with a song called Hold On Dear Brother, which sounds like it'd be something written by the Wilsons because of the 3 brothers there, but it's actually another one by Ricky and Blondie. Again, it's a very 70s sounding song, nothing like the Beach Boys at all. Sounds kind of like the band, maybe, kind of southern rock sounding. It's not quite as good, I don't think, as Here She Comes, but it's not bad. I'm going to give it a 6. Then we get to song number 2, which is Make It Good, and so Dennis Wilson's finally back. He wrote a couple of songs that were considered for Surf's Up, both of them very good, that got released later. Didn't make Surf's Up, so that's a Dennis Wilson free album other than backing vocals and playing drums, but he's back, and he's got a couple of songs on this one, which is always a good thing because his songs are always good. This is written with Dennis and Daryl Dragon, and the same Daryl Dragon that was in the God Awful band, the Captain and Tennille from the 70s. But the guy apparently had musical skills. He just chose to be in a crappy band. But anyway, this kind of a cracked, aching vocal, which is Dennis's trademark, declaration of everlasting love. It's not radio or hit single type of a song, but it's a very, very wonderful, beautiful song. Just a swelling grandeur build up to the song. Great, neat song. Maybe best song on the album. I'm giving that a 9.5. We get to song number 3, All This Is That. written by Al Jardine, Carl Wilson, and Mike Love. Another one of those spiritual, religious type songs. Not really exactly sure what they're going on about. A little bit confusing. It starts off with I am that, thou art that, all is all. I am that, thou art that, all this is that, which is kind of reminds you of I am he, is you are me, as we are all together by the Beatles. But thou art that, it's also sort of a, I don't know, the Trinity or something, religious type reference, I guess. Uh, Reference to golden auras that glow around you. Song's okay. I'll give it a 6.5. We move on to song number 4, which is the last song of the album. Closes out the album with another Dennis Wilson track, written by Dennis and Daryl Dragon again. Two versions of this song. There's one on the album. There's one on the 45, which is on the, I guess, the flip side of Marcella. I'm not sure. This was actually was considered as a solo album that Dennis was thinking of doing at this time, but that never materialized, so he went ahead and used it for the Beach Boys. He would later do a solo album, Pacific Ocean Blue, but that would be a few years down the road. Cuddle Up, a swirl of harmony in parts that kind of reminds you of the Beach Boys. Again, the trademark Dennis Wilson fractured, whispered, aching vocal, which sort of builds up. It goes from barely can hear it to building up to this grand sort of statement vocal, and back and forth between that. It reminds me a little bit of Love on John Lennon's Plastic Ono Band. This is a less claustrophobic version of that, maybe, and that's a great song. I'm not putting it down in any way. I love, but this is a more open type of version. I mean, they don't really sound like that. It just has the same kind of spirit and vibe to it, I guess. In my mind, it's more pastoral and broad kind of version. Much the same sentiment. It's just I don't know, falling asleep, holding the one that you love in your arms. It's a slight song in some ways, but it's a very effective and beautiful song, and it builds up at the end as kind of like the finale of a movie, big, broad, bang-up finish to a movie. Give that a 8.5. Overall, I'll give this album a 7.5. It's a different album for the Beach Boys, and it's a pretty good album. The last 5 or 6 albums, I don't know that I like this one as much as those, but I do like it quite a bit, and it's one that I think I'll be playing in the future. I'm just not sure exactly how much. But anyway, next up in the catalog is Holland from 1973, and so we'll get to that in time. Hope everyone's having a good day, and hope it's not as hot wherever you are as it is here. We'll talk to you later.